Harper woke to the gentle sound of the wind tapping against the bedroom window. The bed beside her was empty, untouched, with the pillows still perfectly arranged. No sign remained that Cole had slept there. She reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing against the cold, vacant space where he once lay. 2 days. It had been 2 days since he walked out, carrying only a small suitcase filled with a few clothes and an expression she couldn't quite decipher. He hadn't said where he was going, and she hadn't found the strength to ask. She sat there in the quiet, wrapped in the stillness of a house that had once been alive with laughter, conversations, and shared dreams. Now, all that remained were fading echoes of what once was. Her eyes drifted to the bedside clock, but time felt meaningless, frozen in place. Finally, she forced herself up and trudged to the kitchen. The coffee maker sat cold and untouched, a silent reminder that nothing in this house was as it used to be. As she prepared coffee, her thoughts wandered. She remembered the first time she met Cole, in a crowded university cafe. He had been quiet yet determined, showing up day after day just to catch a glimpse of her. A small smile played on her lips at the memory of their first date, a simple walk in the park where he had nervously reached for her hand. His palm had been sweaty, but the gesture was pure, filled with promise. They had been young, full of dreams, and their love had once felt unshakable. Marriage had been the happiest chapter of their lives, at least for a while. Cole's playful and hopeful nature had a way of making Harper laugh, even on the hardest days. He was the light, and she was the anchor, keeping him grounded when his ambitious ideas threatened to pull him away. For years, they worked in harmony, complementing each other seamlessly. Arguments were rare, and when they did happen, they were nothing more than fleeting disagreements, never deep enough to cause real damage. But what had once felt effortless had slowly begun to weigh them down. It started with the usual struggles, bills piling up, forgotten promises, neglected responsibilities. Then, the small frustration started to build. Words became sharper, nights ended in silence, and they found themselves turning away from each other instead of leaning in. Then came the decision to have children. At first, the idea filled them with excitement. They imagined nursery colors, tossed around baby names, and pictured the joy of seeing their own reflections in a new life. But as months passed, the tests remained negative. Harper clung to hope, but each failed attempt left her feeling more and more defeated. Cole, ever the optimist, reassured her that they had time, that there was no need to rush. But to Harper, his words felt hollow, like he didn't fully grasp the weight of it all. Doctor visits eventually confirmed her worst fear. She wouldn't be able to conceive. That was when everything truly began to fall apart. Cole wanted to talk about alternatives. "We can adopt. We can explore treatments," he said, his hand reaching for hers. But Harper couldn't look at him without feeling the crushing weight of guilt. If she truly loved him, how could she sentence him to a life without children? How could she deny him the chance to be a father? The distance between them grew. Harper stopped talking about the future. She pulled away from his touch. At first, Cole was patient, giving her space, but that patience eventually turned into frustration. "You need to talk to me," he pleaded one evening, after hours of silence. She had been sitting on the couch, staring at the television without really watching. "Talk about what, Cole?" she snapped, her voice laced with bitterness. "Every time you look at me, all I can think about is what you're giving up." "I'm not giving up on anything, Harper," he said firmly. "I chose you, but I didn't choose for things to turn out like this." The tension between them had been simmering for months, each day weighed down by unspoken words and growing resentment. Arguments had become a routine, set off by the smallest things. The blaring of an alarm clock, a dish left in the sink, forgetting an important date. But deep down, Harper knew those fights were never really about those trivial annoyances. They were about everything they had buried, all the conversations they had avoided for too long. And then one day, Cole simply stopped. He stopped arguing, stopped raising his voice, stopped slamming doors in frustration. Instead, he retreated into silence. And in many ways, that hurt more than the shouting ever had. Harper felt a crushing tightness in her chest. The devastating realization that love hadn't left them, but exhaustion had. They had been fighting for something neither of them was sure could be saved anymore. Now. She sat alone in the apartment they had once shared, her eyes fixed on the envelope resting on the kitchen table. The lawyer's name was printed in cold, emotionless letters across the front. Today was the day they would sign the papers and bring their 10-year marriage to an official end. Morning arrived, and Harper found herself seated across from Cole in the lawyer's office. Her heart was heavy, her thoughts an overwhelming blur. Cole, sitting opposite her, looked lost, his expression a mixture of hurt, confusion, and resignation. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses, read through the terms of the divorce in a monotone voice, as if reciting a script from another world. Harper gripped the pen so tightly that her fingers ached. She glanced up and met Cole's gaze, intense, unwavering. A shiver ran down her spine. For a fleeting moment, she hesitated. She almost said something, almost asked him to save her. But then she remembered the lonely nights, the words they had left unspoken, the emotional distance that had turned their love into something fragile and unfamiliar. Her resolve hardened. Then Cole spoke, his voice quiet but urgent. "Stop, Harper. Don't sign it." The room felt like it had frozen in place. Harper's breath caught in her throat. "I know you're sick." The world tilted. The air seemed to vanish. Her fingers trembled around the pen. "What did you just say?" she managed to whisper. Cole leaned forward, his gaze locked onto hers. "I know you have cancer." The lawyer looked between them, clearly caught off guard by the sudden turn of events. Harper felt the blood drain from her face, her pulse hammering in her ears. "You're imagining things," she murmured, refusing to meet his eyes. But deep down, she knew it was useless. Cole had always been able to see right through her, even when she tried to hide the truth. "I'm not," he said softly. "I found the test results this morning when I went back to the apartment to get my things." Earlier that day, Cole had returned to their old apartment for what was supposed to be the final time, to collect his remaining belongings and close that chapter of his life. But while rummaging through a drawer, his hand had landed on an envelope bearing the name of a medical clinic. Curiosity made him open it, and inside he found the truth: uterine cancer. He had read the words over and over, his mind struggling to process them. The floor beneath him had seemed to disappear. Harper was sick, and worse, she was facing alone. In that moment, Cole realized that divorce wasn't the real loss. The true danger was losing her forever. Something inside him shifted. He couldn't let her go through this by herself. Not after everything they had been through. Not after all the love they had once shared. Back in that cold office, Harper squeezed her eyes shut as tears she had fought so hard to contain finally broke free. "You shouldn't have gone through my things," she whispered, her voice fragile. "And you shouldn't have kept something like this from me." Cole shot back, his voice shaking with raw emotion. "My God, Harper, did you really think I would let you face this alone?" She didn't answer right away. How could she explain the fear that had consumed her? The terror of being a burden, of watching love morph into obligation? How could she put into words the nightmare of becoming someone he stayed without a duty rather than choice? Taking a shaky breath, she finally found her voice. "What do you want to say, Cole?" she choked out, barely holding herself together. "I was afraid," Harper admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to stay out of pity." She had received the diagnosis just days before they were supposed to finalize their divorce. The weight of it had paralyzed her, leaving her unable to find the words. Their communication had deteriorated so much that she couldn't even imagine how to tell him. She had been drowning in fear and uncertainty, never anticipating how everything would change in an instant. Cole reached across the table, his fingers closing around hers. The touch was achingly familiar yet distant, as though time and separation had built an invisible wall between them. A shiver ran down her spine at the unexpected warmth. "Do you want to know why we ended up here?" he asked softly, his thumb tracing light circles on her skin. "Because we stopped fighting for each other. But I'm still here, Harper. And if there's one thing I know for sure right now, it's that I don't want to lose you." His words crashed over her like a tidal wave, sweeping away years of pain, resentment, and distance. She met his gaze, and for the first time in so long, she saw something she thought had been lost: an intense, unwavering love. Not the quiet, settled affection that comes after years together, but the kind that stands resilient in the face of any storm. "I'm not going anywhere," Cole murmured, tightening his grip. The lawyer, sensing that his role in this meeting had become unnecessary, cleared his throat discreetly. But Harper and Cole were too lost in the moment to notice. "But what if—" Harper began, her voice unsteady, her doubts creeping in. Cole silenced her with a gentle touch, placing his finger lightly against her lips. "No, don't even go there. We'll face this together, one day at a time." A deep breath shuddered through her as she slowly nodded. The crushing weight she had been carrying for so long seemed to lift, just enough for her to breathe again. She knew the road ahead would be tough, filled with pain and uncertainty. But now, she wouldn't have to walk it alone. The lawyer quietly gathered the divorce papers, tucking them back into his briefcase. His work here was done. Cole finally spoke, his voice soft yet certain. "Shall we go home?" Home. The word had never felt so meaningful. It was no longer just a place. It was safety, warmth, and love. A small, genuine smile played on Harper's lips as she whispered, "Yes, let's go home." Hand in hand, they left the office, leaving behind more than just signed papers. They left behind years of misunderstandings, words never spoken, and love nearly lost. A new beginning. The months that followed tested them in ways they never could have foreseen. Doctor's appointments, exhausting treatments, and nights filled with fear and uncertainty became their new reality. But through it all, Cole never wavered. He was there at every chemotherapy session, holding her hand. He stayed up reading to her when pain and nausea kept her awake. He reminded her again and again that she was strong, beautiful, and never alone. And in turn, Harper learned to see love in a new way. She cherished each moment, every small kindness, every second spent together. Life no longer felt like something to simply endure. It became something precious. Every conversation mattered. Every glance held meaning. Slowly, they began to dream again, to plan for a future no matter how uncertain. Nearly 2 years after that fateful day in the lawyer's office, Harper received the news they had been waiting for. Remission. The cancer had retreated. Though the journey wasn't over, hope had never been more alive. That night, Cole prepared a quiet dinner at home, the kind of intimate celebration that had once been their favorite. As they finished eating, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Harper's breath caught. "I know we're already married," Cole said, opening the box to reveal a delicate diamond ring. "But I want to do it again. I want to promise you, this time with even more certainty, that I will always be by your side, in sickness and in health, through every storm and every sunrise." Tears welled in Harper's eyes. She could only nod, too overwhelmed to speak. With the gentlest touch, Cole slid the ring onto her finger, sealing his vow with a tender kiss. A love reclaimed. Months later, in the garden of their home, the same place where they had shared so many memories, Harper and Cole stood before their closest friends and family, renewing their vows. But this time, the words in sickness and in health carried a depth they could have never understood before. It wasn't just a promise spoken in ceremony. It was a promise lived, tested, and strengthened through trials they never imagined facing. As they exchanged rings, their eyes locked, filled with emotion. They had learned something priceless. Real love isn't about perfection. It's not about avoiding hardship. It's about choosing to stay, even when leaving would be easier. It's about finding beauty in struggle, strength in vulnerability, and hope even on the darkest days. And when they kissed, it wasn't just the start of a new beginning. It was a testament to the journey that had brought them there. The future was still uncertain, because that's the nature of life. But this time, they faced it with absolute certainty in one thing. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Because love like theirs wasn't just about words spoken in a lawyer's office. It was in the thousands of moments, the silent gestures, the unwavering presence. It was a love that had been lost, rediscovered, and ultimately made unbreakable